Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Oh, yeah, right. We have to do a show. Yes. Hey, how you doing, everybody? It is Friday, January 4th, 2019. Well, it's the second day of the brand new Congress. Does that matter that much? They're in working today, sort of, kind of. I don't think there are any votes expected, and so most people will have headed home at this point, although maybe new members who are still not quite sure they believe it and want to pinch themselves might want to visit the floor once or twice and maybe even participate in some of the debate. They're still working on the rules package. They split it up into at least 3 days worth of work, Title I, Title II, Title III. You don't have to do that, but they are stretching things out. Votes won't come until next week, probably Tuesday. Even if they finish debate on Monday, they'll probably just delay the votes and stack them up on Tuesday. So I don't know if you want to do any last-minute lobbying on PAYGO, now's the time, but I think that has pretty much collapsed for the moment, but don't worry about it like we discussed yesterday. There's a lot of autopsies and after-action reports going on about that. I think we gave you the right preview yesterday, and as a matter of fact, I'm backed up to a certain extent, but, well, I don't know. I guess if you look at things just right and squint just right, you'll see similar themes all over the place, and depending on what brand of autopsy you're looking at, it'll be spun just slightly one way or the other, and people are battling all over the internet over it right now. And I think so far, I think the clickbaitiest version of it comes from Bill Scher, and he admits it as much, but I don't think he's got it wrong. I think it's just he's coming at it from a certain angle, and he recognizes that Ryan Grimm, and I think he's right about this, Ryan Grimm is basically saying the same thing, just coming at it from more of a fan of the progressive wing, or what currently constitutes the progressive wing of the party, which is a little bit different than what used to constitute the progressive wing of the party, to be sure. Both looking at the results of the rules fight and the fight to reshape, or perhaps just shape for the first time, the Democratic agenda of the upcoming House. And I think it can be viewed in a number of ways. Let's see. Did I put aside Bill Scher's thing? I probably didn't. We could just dive right in with that. And let's see. Well, why don't I find that? I didn't put that one aside because I wasn't really wild about the spin that it had, but I think it's probably worth delivering both. We'll start out with the one that's most likely to make you grind your teeth. How about that? I said it's Bill Scher's, and it's because of the headline, which reads, Pelosi 2, Ocasio-Cortez 0. I wouldn't have scored it that way, and I don't think that's how Ryan scores it, but there is something to be said for, I guess, a win for the more realistic notion that you can't just come storming through the door because you're newly elected and extraordinarily popular and say, I'm going to run this 435-member place, and you're not. And I don't think that realistically Ocasio-Cortez or any other member, alone or in combination, really thought that was going to be the case. But I think they did the most they could to advocate for their positions, and they won what they could win, and I wouldn't needle them about it. Anyway, speaking of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because everyone is, right? I guess you can't really encapsulate yesterday without mentioning that for some reason, somebody out there, apparently a far right-wing nut bar type person, thought that they would totally own the libs, or at least Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, by circulating video of her dancing. Yes, she danced in a video that she made in college, which was kind of corny looking, but okay, whatever. I mean, you've seen it by now. I believe everybody has seen it at least 15 times by now. It's, I mean, by itself, the whole thing in context is a dopey video that apparently got made by Boston College students or Boston University. I can't remember which one she went to. And they'll get all upset about that. But you guys can fight among yourselves up there in Boston. You love fighting, right? I saw Good Will Hunting. They're all like that. The whole city is like that. Even the students who are from out of town and out of state. They all speak that way and they love fighting. This is what I learned from the movies. Anyway, I like apples. So, anyway, she and the fellow students, I don't know, it's a student group. They're promoting God knows what. And they did a dance video, and it was a mashup or a spoof of sorts of the dance scene from The Breakfast Club, which, as I understand it now these days, we've gotten on so far in time that there's a generation or two that's like, oh, yeah, right, for the one from Turner Classic Movies. Screw you, kid. Anyway, most people have seen it. It's been on TV enough times. They did the dance. They did a credible job in recreating the dance. There's nothing embarrassing about it, but they thought, we'll own her by showing her as deeply unserious. It hasn't worked. She dances fine. She doesn't do anything weird. All her clothes are on. What do you want? So anyway, that's where we are. And apparently the person who actually originally tweeted it around got ratioed right off of Twitter, and the account is deleted, and that's how that should have ended in the first place. It was so dumb and such a cell phone that you wonder sometimes whether Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez may have released that video herself. That's how bad it was. It works fine for her. Now she looks like a real person. She didn't before. She always did. All right. Well, anyway, Pelosi 2, Ocasio-Cortez 0. On day one, says Bill Scher, the new speaker has already shown progressives who's in charge of the new House. And the answer is the Speaker of the House is in charge of the new House. No news there. Armando chimes in, by the way. Yeah, I'll take you up on your offer to join us for a chat as well. We should absolutely talk about that. Secret code for what he told me in the background. Nancy Pelosi, says Bill Scher, cannot be seen by her party as being weak on negotiating with Donald Trump, says President Donald Trump's acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. Thanks, Mick. And Nancy Pelosi is only looking to protect her speakership, and that's why she's unwilling to negotiate with us. According to White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, these were excuses by the Trump administration to shift blame for the government shutdown, but they were also intended to suggest that Pelosi's hold on the speaker's gavel is tenuous, buffeted by a left-wing insurgency led by ambitious, impatient newcomers like, we'll just say AOC these days. The reality is that Pelosi grabbed the gavel on Thursday with a firm grip. The first two battles led by Ocasio-Cortez and her Instagramming army of rebels, and I guess that's meant to be dismissive, but it's working so far, ran smack into Pelosi's establishment fortress. When Ocasio-Cortez made waves by loudly demanding a new committee tasked with drafting a Green New Deal, Pelosi quietly brushed it aside last week as if to say, kids, brush up on your schoolhouse rock. Or, on the other hand, another way of looking at it is she said, oh, yeah, we should have that committee, and now we do. Then, after a meek surrender, Ocasio-Cortez, along with Representative Ro Khanna, I watched the vote yesterday so that I could hear his name pronounced by the clerk, and now I forget how they did it. And I didn't save it either. Anyway, they hastily tried to derail restoration of the so-called pay-go rule, pay-as-you-go, a limitation on new spending without offsets that some on the left see as a threat to their big-ticket agenda, only to watch the chairs of the Congressional Progressive Caucus side with Pelosi and nip the rebellion in the bud. The Green New Deal gambit is the more significant flop. Ocasio-Cortez led a campaign for turbocharged climate change committee that would be required to produce a bill zeroing out fossil fuels in 10 years, along with a federal job guarantee to mitigate any economic shocks. She also insisted the committee have subpoena power and only include members of Congress who don't accept contributions from donors in the fossil fuel industry. None of her demands were accepted. Instead, the rules resolution for the new Congress, in the new resolution, Pelosi created a select committee on the climate crisis tasked with proposing climate policy recommendations to existing committees, similar to the process that Pelosi established in her first stint as Speaker. The person Pelosi tapped to be chair of the Select Committee, Representative Kathy Castor of Florida, made clear that the Green New Deal wouldn't be the sole focus of the committee's work and that she could not insist that every member reject donations from the fossil fuel industry, though Castor did say she would stop accepting them. That's a win. Castor, who is not a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, was likely picked because she had been the number 2 Democrat on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and can be expected to respect that committee's jurisdiction over climate policy. Or she has been. I guess she still is. And otherwise, why would she respect it? Anyway, the response from Ocasio-Cortez and her allies was negative but limited. In other words, responsible, but, whatever, screw them. The harshest response came from the new climate activist group Sunrise, who aren't members, don't worry about them, which declared the rejection of the Green New Deal resolution to be a dereliction of duty from Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership, and they should probably learn to turn that down, but that's their role. They're outsiders, and they agitate. They do these things. Sunrise and the leftist PAC Justice Democrats also took aim at Castor for having a retirement account that includes a mutual fund which invests in utility companies, which is, I'm glad that came up because I think that probably illustrates the infeasibility of satisfying who knows who on the question of, do you take fossil fuel money? I don't know that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would agree that owning a mutual fund that invests in utility companies counts and would disqualify you from service on the committee as she envisions it. But, again, Sunrise and I mean, we should mention Justice Democrats PAC is affiliated with her, or she's affiliated with them, however you want to describe the relationship. But, that's what they do. They agitate for things, and then people in the middle say, don't worry about it. But Ocasio-Cortez, can I just say her name correctly? Ocasio-Cortez stood down, again, rather responsibly. Although she lamented on Twitter that even in our own party, it's apparently too controversial to ask that we keep oil and gas companies away from enviro policy, she didn't declare her opposition to the rules package on the ground that it lacked a Green New Deal. Then, when the rules package was formally released on Tuesday, she and Khanna did announce their opposition, but over PAYGO instead. On Twitter, she described PAYGO as a dark political maneuver designed to hamstring progress on health care and other legislation. But in the rush to pick a new fight, she failed to rally her fellow progressives. The Congressional Progressive Caucus co-chairs, Representatives Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan, released a statement clarifying the PAYGO rule was simply an implementation of the PAYGO law, and it's a pretty weak law. Congress can waive its own restrictions and often has. Jayapal and Pocan assured progressives that they would propose legislation to change the law. Good idea if you want to. A move that bolstered Pelosi and sidelined a messy intra-party debate. Rounds 1 and 2 between the Democratic establishment and the Tea Party of the left. Went to the establishment. What went wrong for progressives? Because he cares and he would like to help you? Maybe. Take a listen. The first thing Ocasio-Cortez did when she stormed into the Capitol on November 13th was lead, alongside Sunrise, a live-streamed protest at Pelosi's office demanding adoption of her Green New Deal committee resolution. Both Ocasio-Cortez and Pelosi immediately strained to characterize the spectacle as something cooperative and collaborative. Should Leader Pelosi become the next Speaker of the House, we need to tell her that we've got her back, said Ocasio-Cortez, deeply inspired by the young activists and advocates leading the way on confronting climate change, tweeted Pelosi. But Ocasio-Cortez must have hoped that grassroots pressure would squeeze Pelosi, and Pelosi does not care for being squeezed. Soon after the protests, Ocasio-Cortez's Capitol protest was validated by several media outlets that raved about her social media strategy. The New York Times marveled at how she tries to bring her followers into the political process. The progressive news site Think Progress enthused over how she used Twitter and Instagram. She now has more than 1 million followers on each platform to popularize the concept of a Green New Deal. But her strategy to win support was fundamentally flawed. Starting with the proposal itself, I disagree. It's not the entirety of the strategy. Her role in it was played reasonably well. The proposed Green New Deal Committee structure allowed no room for alternative proposals. That's a bit of a problem, but I don't know if that's her strategy. Even though other robust policy ideas to tackle the climate crisis exist, a new committee that could produce only one particular solution to the climate crisis not only provoked a turf battle with the incoming chairs of existing environmental committees, but it also forced members of Congress to choose between those chairs and an idea with scant specifics and enormous political risks. And the demand to deny committee seats to anyone who takes money from people in the fossil fuel industry, while useful for brandishing moral superiority, further weakens the prospects for coalition building. In order to craft legislation that can eventually pass, including surviving the Senate supermajority threshold, some members of Congress who represent states and districts that are dependent on the fossil fuel industry will need to be on board. Telling a large faction of lawmakers that their views and concerns and those of their constituents are irrelevant to the legislative process is not the way to get them to say aye. Ocasio-Cortez tried to overwhelm these institutional roadblocks through brute grassroots force, if you can call it that, but her big social media numbers are undercut by the midterm election results. The Democrats who won in red states and districts did not run on an expansive democratic socialist agenda. That doesn't really mean much to me or to her, actually. So there's little reason for other members of Congress to believe her Instagram and Twitter followers represent the powerful geographical cross-section of America, nor do they need to, I would add. Moreover, there is no electoral mandate for a Green New Deal. Nobody running in competitive districts ran on it. Even Ocasio-Cortez didn't prioritize the idea. In the viral video that fueled her upset primary victory, she didn't even utter the word climate. The activists themselves have barely begun to make their case. So why would Pelosi feel pressure to yoke her entire caucus to an untested proposition? There's an old adage in politics that lawn signs don't vote, but that one is wrong. Perhaps we can add a new corollary. Instagram followers don't pass legislation. You can be sure, though, that when Bill is advocating for a bill, he'd be asking all of his followers to do exactly the same. Go ahead and add it, but you won't be practicing it. Pelosi surely knows as much, which explains why she was unfazed by Ocasio-Cortez's attempted show of force. After Ocasio-Cortez and Pelosi traded niceties following the Sunrise protest, some speculated that the two were actively cooperating, and we shouldn't assume intra-party friction. I certainly believed that the joint statements afterwards were cooperative. Dismissing that is conflating it with premeditated cooperation is rather foolish, but okay, whatever. But Pelosi has not exactly hidden her disdain with those on the activist left who push proposals she considers foolish. In a New York Times interview conducted before the midterm elections but published shortly afterward, she sarcastically said, "I have those who want to be for impeachment and for abolishing ICE. Two really winning issues for us, right? In the districts we have to win, I don't even think they're the right thing to do." This is what distinguishes Pelosi from Republican speakers. She doesn't hesitate to keep her party's ideologues in check. She did not go out of her way to antagonize those protesting in her office, including Ocasio-Cortez. After all, she did need the New Yorkers' vote for speaker, but neither did she, let's say, see any reason to reward their grandstanding. Like Pelosi, Ocasio-Cortez does not appear inclined to alter her approach to politics. In a late Tuesday night Twitter post, she offered a few social media ideas for public servants looking to build an audience, namely policy proclamations that fit Twitter's character limit, such as single-payer Medicare for all, end for-profit prisons and ICE detention, and, of course, fight for a new Green New Deal. But so long as she is more focused on building an audience and building cases for her positions among her congressional peers, and she only has had congressional peers for about a little under 12 hours, so I cut her a little slack, she will likely find herself on the short end of more intra-party battles. Pelosi, meanwhile, won back the gavel thanks to renewed respect from her colleagues and from many rank-and-file Democrats after dismantling a revolt on her right flank, Bill. But it's her deft management of her left flank, because they accede to it, that allows her to maintain order and present a united front when negotiating with Republicans. And she should probably remember that as well. if Trump and his administration think they're going to be dealing with a speaker running scared of her base, then they haven't been paying attention. So it's not entirely off base, but of course it takes every opportunity to nudge. And I don't think, in the end, the result is really hitting the nail on the head. It's close. There's a lot to it. And he, in his own tweets, recognizes a lot of similarities with Ryan Grimm's own view of how things went in his email newsletter. Some of the articles in which he, I guess probably all of them, he publishes online as well. This piece here, his wrap-up yesterday, Ryan Grimm, that is, the contradiction Ocasio-Cortez and her allies will need to resolve. Let's just run through this one, too, before our break. At today's swearing-in ceremony in the House, Jahana Hayes and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez were seated next to each other while I watched from the gallery. Doesn't get a lot better than that, he says. To refresh your memory, Hayes was the candidate who came up in Connecticut housing projects, struggled to graduate as a teen mom, and then was robbed of the party endorsement at a rigged convention. She overcame that, though, won the primary and won the general. You probably know who the other is. I walked part of the way to the swearing-in with Ocasio-Cortez and caught this poignant moment with the Capitol Guard, who often greets members of Congress warmly and enthusiastically, but not like this, and link here to a video I saw circulating on Twitter yesterday in which one of the Capitol worker in question here warmly greets and hugs and says, all right, she's a New Yorker, she's fantastic, etc., etc. Very nice. Perhaps the most unpoignant moment I witnessed was this one. Republican Ben Klein brought his two daughters to the ceremony. This is kind of funny, actually. When one of them, who looked to be about 4 years old, began clapping for Pelosi's nomination as Speaker, he gently stopped her, then whispered into her ear, presumably explaining why the occasion was not to be applauded. Kind of gross, but okay. On Wednesday morning, after it became clear that the House rules package for the 116th Congress would include a conservative measure known as pay-go, a spokesman for Bernie Sanders called for progressives in the House to oppose it. Really need to kind of keep your eye on your own house there, dude, but okay. Representative Ro Khanna was the first out of the gate, calling it terrible economics and promising to vote down the rules package. Or vote against the rules package, anyway. Ocasio-Cortez announced her opposition to the rules package shortly after, and it looked like a rebellion was brewing among the newly energized and organized left, except it wasn't. Pay-go, which requires that any new government spending be offset by tax increases or budget cuts elsewhere, would hinder policy initiatives like Medicare for All or tuition-free public college. Still, leaders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, who extracted major concessions from Nancy Pelosi in exchange for their support of her speakership, we discussed those yesterday, chose to sit this one out. CPC co-chairs Representatives Pramila Jayapal from Washington and Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, and he might be Pocan. I got to get all these names right. Put out a statement in support of the rules package Wednesday, unwilling to risk the other gains they had won. Again, pretty wise. Not a bad move. By the next evening, when the package hit the House floor, just 3 Democrats voted it down, with Khanna and Ocasio-Cortez joined by Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. Did they vote? They didn't vote it down. Voting it down, of course, is defeating it. And the package is still on the House floor, and I guess maybe did they vote against Title I? Because like I said, I'm pretty sure they're still working on the rules package here, so it's not over. But it was Khanna, Ocasio-Cortez, and Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. The sudden burst of energy and the just as sudden collapse. Here comes Armando. Okay, sure, we might as well join in here. Hey, Armando, how you doing?
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll continue on with this one.
Okay. I want to join this discussion.
Sure.
Too,
that would be great. Oh, no. That's no reason I need to do it on my own. Actually, I'm really kind of desperate for some additional input. So it's just it's perilous reading through these things on your own. Anyway, by the next evening, when the package hit the House floor, Kana, Ocasio-Cortez, and Gabbard voted against it. But the sudden burst of energy, as Ryan Grimm writes here, and the just as sudden collapse brought into relief in the starkest way yet the paradox that is Ocasio-Cortez's position in the House. She has as much influence outside of Congress as anybody else she serves with. Her every tweet is a potential news cycle, and the routine happenings of her high school and college life get turned into fodder for conservative faceplants on disturbingly regular occasions. She has used that platform to shift the broader political conversation in ways previously unthinkable. For nearly 2 decades, Democrats have quietly grumbled that it's just not possible to get people interested in doing something about climate change. Ocasio-Cortez, in a matter of days, got people interested. I think there was an awful lot behind that, but okay. But inside the building, she's heavily outgunned. Aside from her close ally, Kana, the only members of Congress to endorse her primary bid, or the only one member, to endorse her primary bid after first endorsing the incumbent, by the way, Ocasio-Cortez is strengthened by her squad, which includes Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. But even the squad broke with her on the House Rules package and supported Pelosi. The gap between her power outside the Capitol and the display of it on the day one on the inside could hardly have been greater, and it's an imbalance that simply can't hold long term. Something has to give. One side or the other will need to break or bend, and it remains to be seen which one it will be. All right. Well, our break is coming up here, but I'll read our way into the break. Get the heart of it, though. Well, maybe we'll even stop with the reading of it. The heart, though, of his argument is, she comes to Congress as an outside organizer and finds it difficult to organize so far inside Congress, though she hasn't been there very long. And as you know, it's constituted of different people than the grassroots itself. Not a surprise or an uncommon thing. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air. And now, that's down to about 1 in 15. But we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7. For which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against it. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you. But remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box. And you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It occurs to me, I think we do have to probably continue with a little bit of this reading. So I want to use, or let Ryan use his own words here in describing this. He goes on to say, at the heart of this paradox is the House Democratic Caucus's resistance to political organizing and Ocasio-Cortez's grounding in it.
Sorry, I'm giving you a verbal eye roll at that. Okay, go ahead.
But I think he's got a decent point here.
All right,
which is okay. On the way to the swearing-in ceremony, I asked Ocasio-Cortez how her view of politics in Congress had changed since she'd won her primary, and I don't know if this gets at the point, but that's what he asked her. I think coming through this process from the background of organizing and as an organizer, it really makes you think of the political process as it really opens up what the field looks like, of what change is possible. So it's not just about whipping votes or getting someone to a yes or no, although all of those are critical elements of the job. But the other part of it is really shaping the landscape of what we think is possible.
Yeah, they used to call that the Overton window.
Yes. It's not new. Her most successful organizing efforts so far began with the Sunrise Movement and the Justice Democrats-led occupation of Nancy Pelosi's office during orientation. Ocasio-Cortez and the activists demanded a select committee to craft legislation towards a Green New Deal. It sparked a national conversation that's still alive today, but the committee Pelosi ultimately created, unveiled in Thursday's rules package, is weaker than the one she created on the same issue in 2007. I think there are a lot of wins that we've had so far policy-wise, Ocasio-Cortez said, referring to the gains made by the CPC in the rules package. When you look at what's considered a loss, whether it's the select committee or whether it's PAYGO, I see them as short-term losses because in the long run, what we've accomplished is we've put those issues on the map. But getting them on the map came at a cost, and here's where the contradiction comes in that it angered her colleagues who furiously defended the turf of their own respective committees, seeing themselves in competition with the new climate committee. Indeed, incoming Energy and Commerce Chairman Frank Pallone flat out refused to move an unrelated bill by CANA, citing his public support for what he saw as a rival committee. That hostility built upon already strong wariness on the part of her colleagues who see in Ocasio-Cortez's brand of people-powered, corporate-free politics a challenge to their own integrity or progressivism. And there's a good point right at the end of that one. That however you want to label her brand of politics, and I would recommend, you back off of that a little bit, but people who see in her brand of politics a challenge to their own integrity or progressivism. And you should keep that in mind. Sometimes it's a fitting challenge. Other times it's not. And this is something I really haven't spent enough time on here. But Frank Pallone is about as solid an environmentalist and progressive, really, as the Democratic establishment, whatever that is, has got. And
Who is Frank Pallone to be called the things that Ryan Grimm just called him? It's an outrageous thing for a so-called journalist to write.
And I've run into activists who've said it, and I mentioned yesterday talking to Howie Klein about it, and it was actually kind of comical the way that conversation went. And I said, look, Frank Pallone is about as committed as environmentalist as you're going to find anywhere, inside Congress or out. I mean, when I worked on the Hill, we dealt with his office quite a lot, and I worked for Menendez, and Menendez was not particularly interested environmentally. He had the regular.
Menendez, you could say he's a slacker, blah blah blah. You're talking about Frank Pallone, for Christ's sake.
And Pallone was the big pain in the ass in our office because he kept getting in the way of the biggest project in Menendez's world as a freshman congressman was the biggest domestic issue was dredging Newark Harbor. Which turns up a lot of toxic crap. That's what's in Newark Harbor. And so the port needed to be dredged in order to have, deep draft boats get in and out. It's a huge issue, and the port closes if you don't dredge it regularly. You dredge the thing, you got to dump the tailings somewhere. You dump them. Where do you end up dumping? You end up dumping them. It's in Sandy Hook, New Jersey. That's Pallone's district. And he doesn't want that there. And he was a huge pain in the butt. And he kept this project under wraps, and put stumbling blocks in the way all the time. For people who wanted to get the port dredged, he was a big pain in the ass. For people who are like, I don't know, I think I'd rather that crap not get churned up and dumped off of the beaches from New Jersey's beaches. I'm really for that, actually. And he was... among other things. I mean, he was big into everything. And the water, he was constantly talking about watershed and issues and Clean Water Act stuff. And I mean, he was all over it. And now he's a corporate shill, whatever. And the answer from Howie right away was, well, did you know he's taken more from, Energy and Commerce does all sorts of things. Do you know he's taken more money from the pharmaceutical industry than any other member in history? And I said, I'm sure that sucks.
History.
Whatever, I don't know. And I said, I'm sure that sucks. Although I'm gonna have to ask you, Howie, do you have a county permit for moving those goalposts? Because I don't know, the excavation equipment you had to bring in there for that.
But there's a couple things. There's no way Frank Pallone got the most donations.
I don't know. I mean, pharmaceutical industry is big in New Jersey.
There forever.
Yeah.
And New Jersey, in case you don't know, New Jersey is pharmacy central.
Yes, I learned that. I was there.
You, of course, know that.
I smelled it.
You didn't need it to learn it, but in case the audience doesn't know that.
Right. Oh, yeah. Hey, guys. How are you? Hello, audience. Still here? All right.
Yeah, I'm here. It's just so frustrating. And I know why Frank Pallone probably, first of all, I understand why he despises Ro Khanna, because I don't understand how everybody doesn't despise him. Grandstanding, nonsensical hypocrite, frankly. He gets a ton of money from hedge funds. Oh, but I get it from the individual. Boy, when Beto O'Rourke got money from individuals, they wouldn't agree with that. But Ro Khanna.
Yeah, well, we do run into that a lot. And
Frank Pallone's been in the trenches for a long time.
Yes.
Right? 20 years of this or so.
30. It's 30 years he's been waiting to. He's an environmentalist who has been sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee. When Democrats run it, he sat 10 years under John Dingell, who, as funny as he is on Twitter, is no kind of environmentalist.
No, he's from Detroit. Auto companies. Right. The politics is local, people.
Yeah. So now here he is. Finally, they win the majority back, and at the twilight of this long career, he's like, "Oh my God, I could chair the Energy and Commerce Committee. We have such a crisis with the climate. We can really change things. There's finally a committed environmentalist at the top of this committee." I mean, I think we had a couple of years with Henry Waxman, who's no slouch, but wasn't necessarily a hard-charging environmentalist first and foremost.
No, he wasn't. He was all, Mr. Clean Gene.
So, okay, now he gets a chance to run this thing, and, I can imagine not feeling all that good about having somebody come in and say, well, I've been here 10 minutes. Why don't you hand over the entire rewiring of the economy to me? I don't know. Why don't I? Or I could ask somebody who knows how to do that.
You've been neglecting these issues all these years. Move out of the way.
Yeah.
To Frank Pallone. It's an offense. I'm going to step on your toes here because it's a fundamentally ineffective way to get things done in the House. You can get more tweets, and maybe people will send you more money, and Justice Dems will make money, and Klein will raise money, but that's not going to how the House is going to work. All you're telling all these people who have dedicated their lives, either from hackery or from commitment, to just move out of the way for you.
Yeah,
because you got 20,000 votes in Queens. What? No, they're not going to do it. Yeah. And they're going to make you suffer for trying to show them up, and that's what Frank Pallone is showing Ro Khanna. And Ro Khanna, instead of actually working it out with Pallone, decided to go public with it. What do you think Frank Pallone is going to do to him now?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure, but in a way, I guess I would say, as much as we dislike that sort of infighting and backstabbing, I guess in a way, I would have to say. The fact that Pallone was so clear about what the motivation for blocking Khanna's bill was, it does him a tremendous favor. I mean, you can go out there and organize against me if you want, but he didn't have to say anything. The bill just would never move. And then you say, I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you blaming me for it? Well, you're the chairman. I don't know.
The bill ain't moving.
Yeah, I don't know. Why not? Because I don't know. No, because I'll tell you why. Because you did this. Stop doing that.
Stop doing that. It's called discipline.
Yeah, I know. That's what the power allows you to do.
And public with it. What do you think? I don't understand. This is a guy who's not interested in actually getting anything done because there's 235 Democrats in the House.
Yes.
That's who has the majority. You get 20 of them to agree with you and cheer you on. You know what that's going to get you? Nothing.
It very well may. I mean,
if you're happy to be a backbencher in the House for the rest of your life, that's how you can operate. But this is my whole point about Ocasio-Cortez. This is not a winning friends and gaining power strategy in the House. None of this is, in my view. I think she's misplayed her hand in the sense of wanting to be a player in the House. I don't think she will be. And, of course, no one can really be unless you put in the 10 years. It's just the way it is. So this is a strategy to run for another office. Mayor of New York.
Oh, maybe.
Something else. It's not a strategy to become a player in the House.
Well, that may not be. And I don't know how long she's going to be happy to be
She's
there.
not going to hang
in the house
around
anyway.
for 10 years doing that.
Well, not necessarily doing the same
thing.
thing. She may very well change her tactics, and that may come from realizing they're not working and changing them, which is called, reacting normally to stimuli. Or I think she's got a little bit more of an ability to shift gears and ingratiate herself through other things. It would be if she settles into the way things work, but, doesn't necessarily give up her edge. I think there's a lot of members who actually will ask her, can you teach me how to do this Instagram thing? And she can actually trade that for something. The rest of her crew can't, but...
It's not that she does Instagram. It's that people decided she was the new best thing.
Well,
anybody can do Instagram. Anybody can do those.
Yes, they can. It's just that members of Congress don't know that.
We can't all be 28.
What can I do?
And be attractive. But so that's something you got to look at too. And
I don't know. Tell me why there's a rash of Democrats now drinking beers and cooking in their kitchen doing Instagram. I think they think they could do it.
I think that's silly.
They think that's Instagram as opposed to it being her, But yeah,
I suppose. I mean, look, she knows how to get attention, and that's great, and that's great for running for higher office.
And there's a role in it if you have a really good crew around you where there's other people playing the other side of the deal, and maybe that's what the rest of the leadership of the Congressional Progressive Caucus is doing. Then, even Bernie Sanders used to like to say, you play a role in these things. When he told Clinton that he should have been attacking the health care plan, not Hillary, but Bill, right? That old story was that Bill Clinton came to thank him for his support on their health care initiative.
I've made it before.
And he says, I should have been attacking you.
The left-like argument's a good argument. It's the Overton window argument. It's all legitimate. But there's two paths you go, and I've made this argument about Bernie too. And I thought, and I've said it. If you read me on Twitter, I said, listen, from the Sanders Institute on, with all these people attacking everybody that sticks their head up as a possible presidential candidate, you can't. You have to grow your base. You got to grow your support. You can't destroy everybody else's support. It doesn't work. That's when it's at 2 or 3 people. You're down to that. There's too many people. You can't be that guy, and you can't be the outside guy when trying to be the inside guy. And it's similar to what Grimm is saying here with AOC. AOC wants to be the outsider, but control the inside. You don't get to do both.
It's very difficult, if not impossible.
Somebody who did. Give me one example of a politician who was outside and then became inside by staying the outsider. Donald Trump?
Yeah, I don't know.
Other than Donald Trump.
I thought the thing I drew from this also was his outlining that look, she's comes from an organizing background, and it's difficult to do inside the Congress. It's difficult to do for 2 reasons, and the first, I think, and most obvious, is the one you made here. I mean, these are different people, and they wield power. I mean, as an organizer, an outside Democratic grassroots organizer, your job is to organize people who do not wield power and depend on you, essentially, for combining their voices into something that can wield power. Grassroots organizing tactics among people who wield power and who in fact are only there because of their success as grassroots organizers, generally speaking. And I know they would dismiss some of the corporate or machine or party line Democrats as organizers. They simply walked into the Democratic National Committee and wrote a check and became congressman or whatever. But they are organizers after a fashion in their own districts, and they come with a power base. Grassroots volunteers who you organize outside don't come to you with a power base. And when you encounter people who do have a power base, what do you do with them? Do you sign them up as envelope stuffing volunteers? No, they become coalition members. You treat them at an entirely different level than you would with your routine grassroots volunteer. And, that's, Why is that not classism, which as progressives we ordinarily reject? It is classism. You're absolutely recognizing when people come to you with political clout or political power of their own. It's useful to you and you use it differently. And yeah, it's not grassroots folks here in Congress. They're all there because they all have their own base.
Well, there's another option that's the outsider, and that is basically winning enough seats in Congress of people who agree with you on everything,
Yes.
and are ready to subsume their egos to you, in essence,
Yes.
because that's one of the things I think will eventually turn into. Because it always is. We're all humans. Right. We all have egos. Someone wants to be in the front sometimes. I don't know if you ever noticed when Nancy Pelosi always waits and wants a key member to come out and be in the press conference and do the talking.
Yeah.
You know? So they get their chance to shine. That's part of being a leader, too. Sharing the wealth.
That is true. And it's not that I don't think she could develop that, but here's what I would say.
We haven't seen it yet.
We haven't. And if we ever do see it, I would prepare people for it. Although, what usually happens is the person changes a little bit and they become a little bit more of an insider and a leader, and the people who are with them go right along with it and say, well, you got to wield power. Otherwise, what's the point of being here? And then the people who are slightly younger than them, or who perhaps want somebody different to be wielding power, say, you've gone corporate. And then you say, no, I haven't. You're an idiot. I hate your guts. And then you say, see, why are you pushing back on me? And that's what Frank...
into that discussion.
Right. We were already there. Frank Pallone is that person now. And later it'll be, if she's still around, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez telling someone else, you don't know, I came up in the...
Yeah, exactly. But to wield the power to get it, to build the coalitions. Look, I'll take this Green New Deal thing for an example.
All right.
Let me ask you something. Do you really think the issue, not the story, the issue has been forwarded? Is there something that's happened with regard to climate change policy, discussion of it, that's changed because of this? Or was this turned into, maybe there's no other way to do it, but into a Dems in disarray and fighting Dems with each other, inter-party disputes? You saw the Washington Post story yesterday. First day, Pelosi faces revolt.
Is that right?
Yeah, because that's the story they like. So
yes.
you got to live and understand it if you care about the issue. The reality is someone should have come. I would have tried to come to Pelosi and say, listen, why don't we do this Green New Deal thing? We'll all announce it together.
Yeah. Yeah, that probably would have...
or come to
certainly
Pallone
couldn't
and
have yielded less.
True, with you beside him.
That would have been a thing to do. Say, now, if we wanted a Green New Deal, where would we bring that in Congress? And, research the committees and find out. But of course, if we do that, it's going to be subsumed to the fossil fuel industry agenda because they all take money from. So I guess that's where they came up with the idea.
Say you want a select committee, but you want Pallone to run it.
Yeah, I guess they could. But unfortunately, they're sitting there thinking Pallone is corporate.
And they know it, but they did not want to do it.
I am not certain that they know it.
Or they don't know how to do it, which is just as damning if you ask me.
Yeah. You should. I always feel like you should study. How would this be done normally? And it's okay to throw the rule book out eventually if you have support for doing it. But or even to propose because you want to play an Overton window game. I propose throwing that part of the rule book out. That part sucks. It just gets in the way. All right, but what I guess the other thing is if people then come to you and they say, look, I actually think maybe. I'm not really sure what the Green New Deal is exactly, but the idea of having, a really focused effort, a moonshot effort on climate, I think is a sellable one. So
absolutely.
Let's see. What can we do? Well, I don't think we can make it, and here's why. I don't think we can make it so that no member of the committee is allowed to take fossil fuel money. I think we're going to have to settle for no Democrat, if you can get it, no Democrat would be named to that committee. Yeah, if that and certainly make it prospective as much as you can, and will prevail on the steering and policy committee not to name members to this new committee who are out of compliance with this. But you guys have to do some work. Here's a list of places that would be poison. Can't take this, and this. What about things that are off that list? I don't know. Case by case basis, I guess. We got to have some opportunity for judgment. So, all right, let's go with that. Well, what about the Republicans on the back? Yeah, they're going to have to do it themselves. There's not a Republican in the country that doesn't take some fossil fuel money. And don't worry about them. They're just there to fill seats. We outvote them all the time. Don't worry. And I know it's unfair for Democrats to commit to this disadvantage, I guess, but we were going to try and do it anyway. So I'm not worried. I think we can make something like the committee. It's just if you stick to this thing that's on the sunrise agenda here, we can't get to this. Is that all right with you? Are you going to be okay? Can we get the rest of this done? But just say, look, we're not taking the money and we're the ones that dictate what comes out of this committee. Is that okay? If the answer is no, it has to be like we wrote it, and say, you're going to have to run for Congress then. Sunrise.
Yeah, well, that's right.
I'm here, you're
At
not.
The end of the day,
this is what I can
win a primary, and boy, you beat Frank Pallone in a primary.
Yeah.
If you think you should. I mean,
I will. Although, again, I got to remind everybody, and not everybody actually knows, this actually is a mistake that gets made. You beat Frank Pallone in a primary. That person doesn't become chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. That person becomes backbencher nobody.
Beat everybody that's ahead of the lines. You got to beat the 30 people that are.
And I guess the news flash is that you beat Frank Pallone in the primary. Kathy Castor becomes chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Good job. I mean, not that she's horrible, but you just rejected her as the chair of your Green New Deal committee, and now she's the chair of the actual legislative committee that'll be in charge of your proposal. Well done.
Well,
and Frank Pallone's gone.
The idea of Castor is, frankly, she knows that whatever she's going to do, there's a jurisdictional prerogative goes to Pallone.
Yeah.
In essence, Castor's there as somebody who's just going to subcommittee this thing over to Pallone. I mean, I understand that, and it's turf wars, and Pallone maybe should have been the bigger man, but I don't think so. He thinks he knows more about that than these people, and he probably does.
Yeah. He may very well. He's been at it for a long time, and that doesn't mean he's corporate. It's nonsense. I mean, I get there's also the pharmaceutical thing, yes, but look, you asked for no oil money.
Pharmaceuticals aren't against climate change.
Yeah,
are against addressing climate change.
I don't know. Maybe they are, but if they are, lay it out. I can't figure it out exactly, but if the game is going to be, well, you can't take oil money, fine, I won't. Well. But you're still in my way now. So, you can't take pharmaceutical money. Oh, well, why?
Well,
I don't
actually,
know.
let me see what money you do take. But you're taking this money.
What do you take that I don't? Well, you can't do that in order to be on its new committee. All right. Sure, we'll work it that way. So, anyway, I thought that was interesting that basically two people from opposite views taking a look at what got done and didn't get done in terms of the rules fight. And drawing in some cases similar conclusions. And I liked the idea of using the opportunity to remind people that organizing the grassroots is not the same as organizing members of Congress.
It's very much not the same.
And by the way, the path to influence and power that you were describing, that is finding and electing like-minded members of Congress who will subsume to some degree their agendas to yours, is called having a leadership pack and using big money politics to do what you want. That's how it traditionally gets done. You can do it without money. You can barnstorm all across the country and simply campaign for the people you want. But in round one of that, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't do particularly well. I think she would probably find that her efforts would be vastly improved if there was a large amount of money she could also put behind her efforts. And certainly her money will be super clean money. I assume, because
she
that's
has
the
that
way she is.
that magic cleaning money ability.
She can clean all the money, right? And then she'll be passing out large checks to people all over the country some of whom eventually win. And you know my formula. If at the end of the day, when you're contesting for a leadership position, you've given more money to more members than the other person, you will win that leadership race. And it having been super clean money, you can be proud of yourself too. Except you will just have done the same thing that you said made everybody else ineligible for leadership. Just you did it cleaner than they did. And maybe that's even an improvement. But it is the system, and you have not reinvented that one. If you can, great. I look forward to hearing about the new system so that I can predict things accurately later. I have no love for this particular system, just the one that is, and it's there, and the mathematics are such that if I want to predict for people on the radio show who's going to win the leadership position, I got to make a prediction. I don't like either one of them, so what can I do? I go to the formula. You want to write a new formula, you can do it, I think.
Yeah, and we're going to the break, and the thing about you don't like the system, but this is the system we have, becomes a even more important point with regard to climate change. Remember, the idea is to eradicate fossil fuel use in 10 years, according to the Green New Deal, right? 10 years.
Yes, I believe so.
Which obviously isn't realistic, but that's okay. You have unrealistic goals. You ask for the impossible to get something as good as possible.
Sure.
But my point is, if we're going to use that standard, that rubric, this idea that this is imminent, we don't have time to wait for the revolution. We have to address it now with what we have. The system we have. We have to address it right away. Yes. At least you have to have a dual track, right?
Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, that's true. Existential crises, I suppose, like Donald Rumsfeld's wars, you fight them with the system you have. So.
Let's talk impeachment on the other side.
Oh, yes, right. That MFer. I understand. Yeah. That was the reference. Okay. We'll definitely talk about that one because something and Jonathan Chait is upset. So we'll get around to placating Jonathan Chait.
Well, I always I love killing him. So.
Okay. All right. Well, that comes up next after this break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Our short break being over, we'll shift topics somewhat. Originally, the whole idea of coming on the show, Armando, was to discuss the developments in the way people talk about impeachment and the calls for impeachment that made some news yesterday. I don't actually have the news article on this. I got to search one or two up here, but why don't you begin?
I can just give you the quick sketch while you look. I believe the newly elected Congresswoman from Detroit was at a Move On event last night, celebrating the new Democratic House. And she went through a whole story of how she made it. And then at the end of her little statement, finished is about Trump saying, and we're going to impeach the MFer.
Yeah.
Obviously, the MFer got a lot of attention, but so did the impeach word.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
And, the media always has the vapors when a Democrat uses a curse word.
Right.
So that certainly got attention.
Go after yourself. Dick Cheney is all right.
All right. So the question is, of course, the prototypical react of the neoliberal corporate sellouts, except for me, apparently, is provided to you by John Chait, and John Chait says this is a gift to Trump.
Right.
And of course, it never would have been a gift to Trump, but to any Republican, but especially not a gift to Trump, who has coarsened our discourse in such a way that what are you even talking about?
Right.
And
I think that was a
about
gift
impeachment.
to Trump.
Trump talks about impeachment all the time. In fact, he says, "How could you impeach today?" He said, "How could you impeach the guy who had one of the greatest election of all time?"
Greatest election of all time. And I have huge hands. as well.
Right. So, but my point on this is to say, I think it's silly in normal, conventional times, but it's absolutely ridiculous to say that when you're talking about Trump.
It's a gift to Trump. I think that saying it was a gift to Trump is a gift to Trump.
You're right. You tweeted that.
Yes.
And I disagree in that. Nobody cares even then. I mean, people can say it's a gift to Trump and nobody cares.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, it doesn't make any difference that it is a gift, but I mean, the gift is, even the liberal Jonathan Chait says that's, all right, so fine.
And I reminded everybody that this is the same guy who decided he was going to support Joe Lieberman in 2006 because we were opposing it.
This is a gift to John McCain. Yes,
this is a gift to John McCain, and Joe Lieberman is with us on everything but the war. But now he's with China and ZTE as a lobbyist. So there he is, being very much with us.
Yes.
But anyway, that's who that guy is. I hate when people pay attention to John Chait because I think he's really stupid and really annoying. But let's think about it from Rashida Tlaib's perspective. This wasn't an accident. She knew what she was doing, right?
I guess. I mean, she may have gotten a little carried away with herself, but who knows? I mean, she meant to say the I word. Yeah. Right. She meant to say we're going to investigate that man-loving guy. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And Dave Weigel asked, well, I wonder how Democrats are going to react to this, yada, yada, yada. And I predicted they'd say wait for Mueller. And lo and behold, Jerry Nadler decries her coarse language and says, let's wait for the facts. We've got to wait for Mueller.
Yeah. Well, that's where they are.
Say.
Yeah, I mean,
but here's the thing.
She's right.
Rashida Tlaib is a freshman backbencher, just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is, not saying I'm going to block the rules package if we don't have a select impeachment committee.
Right.
She's saying we're going to impeach the MFer, and that gets people talking about impeachment. And, well, what's the process? Well, Jerry Nadler, I don't like it. It's premature. We need to wait for Mueller. We need to see where the facts take us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we're talking about expanding the conversation, right?
Yes.
So she says we're going to impeach him. Nadler says it's premature. We should wait for Mueller, and we got to do our investigations.
Yes.
So
that sounds normal. Oh. Now I can't hear you. All right.
We don't know what the facts are.
Yeah, all right. Okay, I think I've got you still. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds like a pretty normal interaction. A backbencher says, well, minus the MF part, which isn't usually what?
Right. That's the one that always gets the attention, though, so it might have been calculated. She just tweeted 30 minutes ago, this is not just about Donald Trump. This is about all of us in the face of this constitutional crisis. We must rise. And by the way, she's not wrong.
No. Well,
she's right.
A lot of the people weren't wrong yesterday, but they did either took wrong tacks or just didn't move enough people to the right portion of the ledger. But I mean, getting rid of Pago is right, but it didn't work out. And,
right, but she's not wrong on the substance, and I think, frankly, from her perspective, who she is, a freshman backbencher who just joined the Congress, she did expand the conversation.
Mm-hmm. She could have said, "It's an open question as to whether or not we're going to impeach the MFer." Then it would have been okay. You could tell Savannah Guthrie that and get away with it.
I guess, but I'm not going to take too much longer, and I probably have no more to say on the subject. It's just, first of all, given who she is, this isn't Pelosi, this isn't leadership. If Ocasio-Cortez said it, I think that would be fine too. I really do. I think that's an important conversation now because it's important from a historical and constitutional perspective, and from the perspective of protecting the country.
Yeah.
That sometimes somebody should be impeached.
Yes, I gather the founders thought so.
Right? If this guy's not a candidate for impeaching, then who is?
He's the greatest candidate for impeaching of all time. He would tell you. He'd tell you himself.
Absolutely. And of course, you don't start there from the middle or from leadership. You start from over here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a Nadler to say that's premature. I don't like your language, but let's wait for Mueller and let's wait for what our investigations find. All right, so hey, let's wait. Okay, we'll do it. Let's see what you find out, and let's see what Mueller's report ever becomes public. There's lots of things, but the conversation is expanded because no one can say it's crazy to consider impeaching Trump. I don't think.
No, it's not.
And it's important that somebody say it. And it's best that people like that say it.
Sure.
Start the conversation.
If everybody said it, but okay.
So I would take that Ocasio-Cortez quote that was mentioned in the Grimm article and apply it here and say this is a good discussion because now we are talking about impeachment and that's a real thing. Mm-hmm. Green New Deal, I don't know, Pelot, who knows? I guess we're talking about the Green New Deal, but no, I'm not sure what anyone's gleaning from that conversation, but we'll see. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's my take on that and why I think it's sort of an outsidery thing to do because you're not an insider, you're not leadership, and leadership is the adults, and they're gonna, well, don't worry, we're the adults here, but it starts the discussion. It does broaden the discourse, and I hope we keep talking about it because I think we do. I would also like to hear. I'll go back to our first show after Trump was inaugurated. The GSA investigation. When is Elijah Cummings going to call that guy up to testify as to why he didn't cancel that lease?
Yeah.
By the way, let's also subpoena all the guests who stayed there. At the hotel.
Why not? I mean, I don't know if they all need to be subpoenaed, but somebody does about those things. And certainly the head of the GSA. The GSA has lost its mind entirely on the hotel, and they continue to. By the way, I understand. I saw the other day that the GSA cleared the way for declaring as essential employees, and so therefore forcing them to work without pay during the shutdown. The employee is still connected to the old post office building tower there. They're still, that's controlled by, I guess, the Park Services, and it's an important draw for people who are staying at the Trump Hotel. That's one of the selling points. You can get a tour of the old post office tower. You get a great view of the city, but it was closed during the shutdown. And guests were disappointed. So the GSA just decided, no, you know what? That should be essential. And guests of the Trump Hotel should not be inconvenienced. We need to open that up for them again.
It's just disgraceful.
Are you crazy? What is wrong with you?
It's disgraceful. There's trash in the parks, but they opened the post office tower for Trump.
Because for his guests.
For his guests.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
They don't want. They're paying me good bribe money. They don't want that to be, less worthwhile. Like they didn't get enough for their money. I'm not going to get them as many bribes if you don't open this up.
That obviously goes to Cummings's Oversight and Government Reform Committee, which he renamed the Oversight and Reform Committee, but that's okay.
I don't know.
This happens to be a government oversight issue, and I would like the GSA to explain itself, not just on the lease, but as you said, this decision that post office tower tours are essential services. It's inconceivable. It's corruption, period. Anyway,
I have no idea.
I'm going to head you back because I actually got like 3 urgent calls.
Oh, okay. Well, you better take care of
I was ranting, so I'm going to have to pretend they're actually urgent.
Okay.
And call them back.
All right. You should do that.
All right.
Take care of that. Thank you very much. Carrying us through the first half. Yes, that is definitely a topic for serious investigation. Something has gone seriously wrong there, and I don't know what it is. And it may be just as simple as, hey, I just want to ingratiate myself to the president and keep my job. It's a good paying job, and it's the sort of thing that an average citizen can actually, put in the time with the government and just rise in the ranks and aspire to. High-ranking, GS, whatever, I can't remember which direction the scale goes, GS 13 plus GS, senior executive service pay for somebody with no particular expertise, but who's just been hanging around and working in the federal government for 30 plus years. And what do I care? If you're taking bribes, you're going down, not me. And they may just be, saying, I'm getting out of the way. The president gets what they get. Why they get what they want. That's the way to keep jobs in Washington. And I guess that's largely true. But that doesn't mean you can't be called in and embarrassed by pointed questioning. They should absolutely do that. All right. And especially all the more so now with the shutdown issue as well. Let's see. Bosgood. Boswood/Bosgood. How do we deal with that? The names. Makes a good point here. Yes, AOC needs to learn tactics, but since when should the usual Dems in disarray narrative guide Dem tactics? And the answer is when there's substance behind the usual Dems in disarray narrative. We will never prevent people from going to the Dems in disarray narrative. It does not have to be true in order for people to use it. It only rings true, however, when there's substance behind it. If there is true disarray, it makes sense to say that Dems are in disarray. When there is no particular disarray and the media uses that nonsense, it's recognized as nonsense by at least some portion of the world. It doesn't necessarily guide Democratic tactics, but all I guess we're really saying here is that you can still have sharp and effective tactics and be in disarray. I don't know that I would marry it necessarily to the Dems in disarray narrative. However, there are certain inflection points where that narrative has more power, and day one of a new Congress is one of those days. On the other hand, that's also where you have a lot of leverage. Both sides of a Dems in disarray fight want typically to avoid disarray. One side would like, the leadership side would like the upstart side to knuckle under for the sake of unity, and the upstart side would like the establishment side, the leadership side, to make concessions in order to get that unity. And, sometimes you're going to get it and sometimes you won't. And sometimes the disarray will be real and sometimes it'll be fake. But to say that, it's not to say that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or anyone else needs to be primarily concerned with avoiding the Dems in disarray narrative. That's never going to happen. But you can contribute to it or give it substance, or you can avoid it. And some days it'll be worth avoiding it, and some days it'll be worth saying, well, yeah, we're in disarray. We have a disagreement. Sorry. That's just, so if the value of the disagreement outweighs the value of the illusion of unity, you go with the disagreement. And learning tactics, I think, I don't even really want to put it that way, but that's the frame you've given us, learning tactics. I feel like sometimes I would shy away from it because I don't know. I can't teach you tactics. I don't know how tactically good I am, but we could discuss tactics anyway, I suppose, and say, some days you're better off sticking to your guns and saying, I'm sorry, we have a disagreement. It's rough. We're going to have to get past this rough patch. And other days it's not. And you learn the difference between the two and don't be a maximalist all the time. I think everybody agrees that that's generally a poor approach to things, and it's probably why you don't see it very often. I don't think that was the case with AOC or anybody else so far. I think everybody's been pretty flexible. I think that's what we were talking about yesterday, and a little bit of what we saw recognized in Ryan Grimm's newsletter. There were victories, and there were parts of the fight during which Congressional Progressive Caucus leadership said, we're not going to get more. We need to back off. It's going to be seen as quieting down and taking our seats, but we're going to pocket some good victories, and we'll be able to show those to people and say, that's why we sat down. And There will be maximalists out there who will be angry about that and who say, stick to your guns all the time, and say, well, I noticed that you are not in Congress. You have not made it here. Those of us who've made it here have come to understand to a greater or lesser extent, depending on where we're from, that sometimes we got to sit down. And then they do. So, all right. Well, anyway, I thought there was an awful lot to be mined from what happened yesterday, despite the fact that almost nothing of substance actually did happen yesterday, but it was very exciting to watch nonetheless. I did watch the voting. I thought it was very interesting. Of course, those of you listening to the program for the past couple weeks or so, probably if you were watching the vote, as I recommended that you do, may have seen, what's his name, Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey, Democrat, newly elected Democrat, I believe, casting his vote. Is he new? I don't even know. We'll look him up. Yeah, let's see. I'll have to get his deal, and let's see. Is this his first? I don't even know. I don't know anything about Jeff Van Drew, to be honest, but let's look him up on Wikipedia. Anyway, what he did was that thing that I said you couldn't do, which is to say that when the vote came up for Speaker, and you remember that the original agitation, I can't vote for Nancy Pelosi. I'm not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi. I'm going to vote no on Pelosi. I'm going to vote against Pelosi for Speaker. And I was just reminding everybody, you got to pick an alternative. You got to name a name. When they call your name, it's not a vote. It's not a yes or no thing. It's not electronic cards. It's you on television by name, shouting out the name of the person that you want. You can vote present, but one that carries its own problems with it, and that it changes the calculus and the numbers of votes that are necessary, and in some cases could create havoc by if enough people vote present, you could really put the election in jeopardy. But that the voting no option was not available to you. So who is it that you're going to vote for? And, people are entitled to say, I don't know yet. But anyway, I told you can't vote no. And then if you watched the vote, you would have seen Van Drew's name called. And I was upset, by the way. And I don't know when this happened. I haven't watched enough C-SPAN lately, but in the olden days, they used to use the pronouns for people. Mr. Van Drew, they would have said, or Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, but they dropped that, and I don't know whether that's a good idea, a bad idea, but I sort of miss it. And it's sort of weird and informal asking people by last name, like, hey, yo, Van Drew, who you voting for? But a lot of them voted by last name, too. Anyway, Van Drew did what I said you couldn't. He voted no. And I figured that around the world, millions and millions of people who listen to the Kagro in the Morning Show. Yeah, right. Look, I wish it was true. But all the people who are listening or have been listening heard him vote no and said, you can't vote no. And some portion of you probably said, I thought he said you couldn't vote no. Well, that's right. You can't vote no. Well, I just heard Jeff Van Drew vote no. He did vote no. Yeah, I heard him. So what do you say to that? I say you can't vote no. Well, they're not hitting him with the mace. I noticed that was true. But it wasn't the end of the story. He voted no. I mean, you can say the word no when they call your name. It just doesn't matter. Although if you really want to say no and have it matter, you could say, I'm voting for Albert No, N-O-H, a Japanese American of great repute. I don't know. I'm making the person up, but you could get away with doing that. But no, you can't vote no. And yet everyone heard him vote no. And if you stuck around to the end of the vote, you would have seen the clerk in telling everybody, okay, the voting's done, and now the tellers are going to check their papers and make sure that we have the vote count right and total it all up. For purposes of totaling Mr. Van Drew's vote, you will count that as present. And, well, that's the answer. You can't vote no. Well, I did. I voted no. Well, no, you didn't, because you got recorded as present. And I don't know whether that was your intention or not. You probably just should have done that. But the reason you didn't, well, I mean, I guess there's two possible reasons why you didn't vote present. One is you weren't listening to me, and I said you can't vote no. And if you do vote no, they're going to mark you as present, so you might as well vote present. But he's an idiot, and he wasn't listening, and he didn't understand the rules, and he just thought he could vote no, and he paid no attention. The other possibility is, of course, he was paying close attention, and just to spite me, no. There's no chance he heard us explaining it, but he may have heard other people say you can't vote no, and he said, to hell with you, I'm going to vote no anyway. Oh, well, they're going to count you as present. Well, fine. What do I care? Well, then why don't you just vote present? I'm not voting present because you said I couldn't vote no, and I want to show you that I can. But it counts as a present. Doesn't matter. I'm not saying present. I'm saying no. That's what I want to do. Like not proven. Arlen Specter and is not proven. You can't vote that. I can. I said it. But there, I don't know what they did with that. They just figured, all right, well, it's not a guilty, so we count it as a not guilty. And that's what they did with it. And it just goes to show, I don't know what, something. We were right. And you can say the word no, but it's going to end up being counted as a present. And I think that's worth noting. And whether or not it was worth it, I did note it. So we're done with that topic. Anyway, I found that very interesting to watch, and I was surprised that word hadn't reached him, or that he hadn't reached out to ask anybody, can I just say no? Or that if he did, then I guess we admire his independent spirit. He was told he couldn't say no, and he said, it's what I want to say. You can't stop me from saying no. You're going to have to hit me with the mace before I open my mouth. Well, they didn't do that, and he said the word no. It just got recorded as present. I found that interesting. I can't help it. Anyway, let's see. Other things that perhaps deserve some attention this morning. There are many, including, well, let's see. Where do we want to go with this? Let's head over to Pocket and see what other things have been put aside. Yes, here's where something we should hit upon. I got an email from former Congressman from North Carolina, Brad Miller, just yesterday, letting me know that he had written a couple of pieces. I have the more recent of the two on inherent contempt. So still carrying the banner of inherent contempt. I talked to Brad Miller an awful lot when he was in the House and serving in the role of, he was chairing the Oversight Subcommittee of the Science Committee, and was one of a couple of oversight chairs to constantly run into the problem of a George W. Bush administration that would not submit to subpoenas, and that when he pulled out the playbook from CRS about what to do as an oversight person when you're running into difficulty, he found the options limited and unsatisfactory, and was the first and maybe the only oversight chair at the time to openly acknowledge, hey, there's really almost no way we can force the executive branch to comply with congressional subpoenas short of inherent contempt or just impeaching the president or some lower officials for refusing to honor our subpoenas. We really have to use, there's some blunt force underlying all of this, and we can try all the nice ways that grow out of and depend on the underlying brute force, but they aren't likely to work. They are not working now, and we're entitled to answers, and we're going to have to go down to the brute force at the root of this thing, and nobody else was willing to go there. So he was the Rashida Tlaib, I hope I'm pronouncing her name close to right. I know though Armando was saying something more along the lines of Talib, which would reverse some of the letters, but maybe that's the actual pronunciation. I don't know. We'll look into that in the days to come. But Brad Miller was one of the very few, and maybe, like I said, the only one who actually bothered to study and understand inherent contempt and said, no, it's a real thing, and we may just have to do it. And he's got a new piece here that we'll read perhaps after the break in the Daily Beast. Here's how House Democrats can play hardball with Trump. They have the long dormant power to jail anyone who defies congressional subpoenas, and it's time they revived it. So for those of you who may have missed our first round in explaining inherent contempt, a fun surprise after the break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. A couple of comments in the interim, thanks to Karen, who says, I'm so old, and we won't say how old you are. I am so old. We don't know how old you are. Don't worry. I remember the inherent contempt discussion, and many of you probably do. Matthew Rigdon, by the way, asking whether or not there was a rule that you can't vote for a fictional person. Could have been voting perhaps for Dr. No. One, you would have to make that clear. And two, I think if they knew you were voting for a fictional person, or you acknowledged that it was a fictional person, I suppose they would say, well, then that's a present. We're just putting you down as a present. You're not serious-minded enough to, by voting for a fictional person. Although, in some senses, aren't we all voting for fictional people, really? Anyway, back to Brad Miller, who sent me these. There were two pieces. One that, where did I'll have to find it? Ran in the Hill, I think, a little earlier. I can find that relatively quickly. Yeah, the Hill. That one was, I don't know, what's the date on that piece? I'll share them both with you, but I think I'll read just one. Was published on November 19th, so early on. And, well worth remembering, but I think they both largely make the same point. So we'll go with the more recent from the Daily Beast. Here's how Democrats can play hardball with Trump. And it reads thus. President Trump is unlike any other president in American history. And in many ways, I would have to agree with that. His coming confrontation with Congress will be different, too. Trump plays by no rules, which means that House Democrats cannot afford to play by the old rules if they hope to obtain likely damning evidence of corruption that Trump will fight to suppress. I see. And it sounds pretty good. Logically, does it hold together? Trump will play by no rules, so you need to play by different rules than the old rules. We should play by no rules too, but then what authority have we to throw him out for rule breaking? I don't know. Anyway, you get the point. The thing is, don't be afraid. Well, you're going to be afraid. I mean, this is going to make people panic if this stuff starts to happen. But that's okay. It's better than the alternative, which is the destruction of the United States and maybe the world and the human race along with it. The response of presidents to congressional investigations has seldom been cheerful, but after the 1994 election, the Clinton administration produced 2 million pages of documents in response to more than 1,000 subpoenas issued by House Republicans investigating alleged misconduct by the Clinton administration and the Democratic Party. 3 of Clinton's chiefs of staff testified before Congress, as did 4 White House counsels, the Chief of Staff to the Vice President, the Chief of Staff to the First Lady, and an assortment of officials with deputy, assistant, or deputy assistant in their titles. A total of 134 Clinton administration officials testified in public hearings on alleged misconduct, and 141 Clinton administration officials spent 568 hours in staff depositions. The guy has marshaled his facts. The Bush and Obama administrations did not follow the Clinton administration's example of grudging obedience to lawful congressional subpoenas. Instead, they lost their respective battles with Congress over subpoenas, but won the war against congressional oversight. And that is what will be important to Trump, I'm sure. The pattern of the Bush and Obama administration's fights with Congress over congressional investigations is familiar. Congress demands documents and testimony, first by letter, then by subpoena. The administration claims that the investigation is motivated by political partisanship, which is at least partly true, but irrelevant. The administration argues that the investigation is outside of Congress's investigative powers and that the administration's deliberations over the policies or actions under investigation are privileged, and refuses to produce the subpoenaed documents or allow administration officials to testify. Congress refers criminal contempt charges to the Department of Justice, which refuses to prosecute. Congress then files a civil lawsuit to ask a judge to order that the administration provide the subpoenaed documents or testimony. Finally, Congress wins because congressional investigative powers are broad and executive privilege is narrow. But by then, the clock has often run out, and other investigations slowed to a crawl because Congress can only pick so many such fights with the president at the same time. This is really the crucial part of this. Trump, of course, will be even more openly obstructionist and promises a, quote, warlike response to congressional investigations. His allies openly proclaim that his strategy is to hinder and delay congressional investigations until after the 2020 election. The administration's use of frivolous arguments and dilatory legal tactics will only be limited by their lawyers' risk appetite for court sanction. House Democrats will investigate controversial policies and actions by the Trump administration, of which there are many, as well as the incompetence and casual venality of many administration officials. Such investigations have long been the bread and butter of congressional oversight. Those investigations will be for relatively low stakes, at least to Trump, who feels little loyalty to anyone apart from his own family, if even to them, and is lightly invested in policy. A tweet or two often explains the entire rationale for the administration's most controversial policies. There are few, if any, internal memos or emails for investigators to find because administration officials first learn of policies from Trump's tweets. Investigations of corruption, on the other hand, will be for very high stakes. Trump will fight those investigations tooth and nail. Federal and state prosecutors already have most and maybe all of the evidence of corruption that congressional investigators will seek. The administration will do everything possible to block the release of that evidence to Congress or to the public. But House Democrats have a powerful and long-dormant tool at their disposal as they retake control. They can enforce subpoenas to obtain documents and testimony without the help of prosecutors or judges. The House and Senate have inherent power to jail a contemner until the contemner provides subpoenaed documents or testimony, similar to the civil contempt power that judges use to enforce obedience to court subpoenas and orders. Congress has rarely exercised that inherent power since the Civil War, and not at all since 1935. Since Americans associate the power to incarcerate with courts, Congress has called in prosecutors and judges to enforce congressional subpoenas to give themselves political cover. The politics may have changed, or I guess I should say the politics really may have changed. To many Americans, especially Democratic voters, the reluctance to use legal powers to check Trump will appear timid, not judicious. And there are checks against abuse of Congress's inherent contempt power. Anyone jailed for disobeying a congressional subpoena will have immediate recourse to the courts by a habeas corpus proceeding. Any incarceration that is not legally defensible will be very brief. Trump will decry any investigation as a partisan witch hunt by House Democrats and a dictatorial abuse of congressional powers, as will the right-wing media. But they will say the same no matter how judiciously or timidly House Democrats proceed. Many Americans are numbed to Trump's bombast. The British Parliament recently used inherent contempt, and we told you that they did, right? Recently used inherent contempt to obtain internal Facebook documents over Facebook's vigorous objections. The executive of a company in a lawsuit with Facebook had copies of the documents. The documents were subject to a California court's protective order, but the executive quickly provided the documents to Parliament when threatened with jail. Facebook's legion of lawyers was powerless to prevent the disclosure. The documents revealed that Facebook collected sensitive user data and provided the data to favored companies. The British press roundly criticized Facebook for misuse of user data and for resistance to proper government scrutiny. Parliament won praise for bold action. Facebook's complaints that Parliament's tactics were sketchy won little sympathy. The same may be true here. Americans may pay more attention to what congressional investigators find than to how Congress obtained the evidence. Even if they use their inherent contempt powers, it will probably still be difficult for House Democrats to win quick compliance with subpoenas of administration officials. Much of the evidence of possible corruption, and maybe the most damning evidence, will be held by private parties, however, and may be beyond Trump's power to suppress. The administration has until now ignored the demand by House Democrats for information about the federal government's lease of Washington's old post office. You hear that, Armando? Trump and his older children converted the historic landmark into Trump International Hotel. With the power of the majority, House Democrats will now subpoena the same information which the administration will refuse to provide on some thin argument. The hotel itself, however, has the same information and no legal excuse, however thin, not to comply with the subpoena. House Democrats will demand that the IRS provide Trump's tax returns. At Trump's direction, the IRS will refuse, despite an express statutory command to do so, but the returns and even more revealing financial information are likely available from Trump's business as well as from Deutsche Bank and other financial institutions that made loans to Trump. An employee of Deutsche Bank with control of subpoenaed documents, like the executive with control of Facebook documents subpoenaed with Parliament, may see little appeal to jail time for disobedience of a congressional subpoena. And Trump's pardon power cannot release from jail anyone held to enforce obedience to congressional subpoenas. Worth noting as well. If the House Democrats aggressively use their own inherent contempt power, then there may be little Trump can do to suppress information controlled by private parties. As to the politics, House Democrats may better risk appearing dictatorial than to appear feckless. We will see. It's a close call, I'm sure. But thank you to Brad Miller for keeping the issue alive and lending it some legitimacy by endorsing it as a member of Congress and now as an ex-member of Congress, so that we don't look like a bunch of crazy bloggers talking about it or making it up like we were accused of doing the first time, or as we were accused of doing when we first discussed the nuclear option, even though it wasn't even our idea and had already been done before, and there were members of the Senate who had already done it and had participated in the first use of it, who were still in service and just insisted that they had forgotten about the whole thing. This stuff does happen. So, all right. Let's see. Other issues in pocket that deserve some attention. Let's see. Where to go on this one? Oh, that looks interesting because I say and there's one of those emojis on there. Yeah. Maybe we ought to take note of this at least before the weekend break. And I don't think I even have a story on this yet, although maybe it's been written by now. But Natasha Bertrand often tweets out the hot stuff in a story before the story gets written. Reacting to a tweet from Eric Tucker at AP. And Eric Tucker tweeted, Acting AG Matt Whitaker, which is a misnomer, of course. He's not the acting attorney general, I still maintain, had breakfast at the Willard Hotel this morning. Why not at the Trump Hotel? I don't know. With former AG, who was actually an AG, Ed Meese. Unfortunately, he was really the attorney general, who tells me Whitaker told him John Huber continues his investigation into various FBI-related concerns raised in the last year by Republican lawmakers, including claims of improper surveillance. So they're still on they wiretapped Trump Tower type claims, and they're still looking into that. What Natasha found interesting about that revelation was that Whitaker briefed someone outside DOJ on an ongoing investigation. I don't know whether there's any sort of acceptable practice of soliciting advice from former AGs on such things that would excuse the discussion, but it's an interesting question, and we might see it develop into an issue over the weekend and into next week. I'm trying to look and see whether there's anything that she referenced lately which might be of interest or that she's written, but I don't see anything jumping out at me. So let's just put that on the record and leave it there. I guess though, thumbing through her tweets reminds me that I think we hit the nail on the head yesterday, and I guess the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Rachel Maddow, several other sources has been back to, have revisited the nonsense of Trump's, at best, the best label you can hang on it is revisionist history about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. And I think we were early on in pointing out, not the outrageousness of it, because everybody beat us to that punch, but the weirdness of coming to the conclusion, you can't say that Donald Trump came to the conclusion, certainly not independently, that the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was justified. And of course, he gave the wrong answer as to what that justification might have been, in addition to being wrong about it being justified. He got the history wrong. But what was weird about it was that's such a niche position to take. It is not even widely popular inside Russia right now. There would be a very, very, very limited circle of people who would ever express such an opinion, and they would all be very closely tied to ex-KGB officer Vladimir Putin. But I'm not positive that they told Trump that at any point, or intimated to Trump at any point that was it. And that's one of the difficulties. This is how Trump's idiocy makes him difficult to prosecute. Under normal circumstances, I would say the president, in order to say that, must have heard it from somewhere. But Donald Trump is such a dope, he sometimes doesn't bother. He doesn't hear anything anywhere. He just makes it up on the spot, or he mixes things up in his head. And it may very well be that it was just a mishmash in his head of Afghanistan and Chechnya. And he knows that he wants to say that Russia today is justified in fighting Chechen rebels because they're terrorists, and they're terrorists because they're Muslim, is how it works in his head. Previously, we would have said, American regimes might have said they were freedom fighters because they were fighting either the Soviets or actually in this case the post-Soviet Russians. But he's so pro-Russian for so many reasons, some of which perhaps still remain hidden, but most of which are well known to all of us, that it may be that he simply figured, as a matter of policy now in the modern era, we'll back Russia against Chechen rebels. And he perhaps remembered that Soviet Russians were fighting in Afghanistan. And we figured it must have been the same reason, because Afghanistan is full of terrorists now, in Trump's head, except for the fact that they're all gone now, and that's why we can leave Afghanistan. Yeah, the two contradictory thoughts held at the same time in Donald Trump's head. No surprise there to anybody. And so something, and they're all sort of Middle Eastern, and some kind of thing having to do with Islam involved in both. And so Chechnya has terrorists who strike inside Russia. So Afghanistan, which has terrorists and they're Muslims, they must also have struck inside Russia, and that's the reason they invaded. That could be a construct all in his own mind, or it's true. He could have been told that, and if he was told that or fed that misinformation, it comes from a very specific place. So I don't know what to tell you about that. Now, here is the Washington Post piece about it. Defying history, Moscow moves to defend Soviet war in Afghanistan. So I guess they actually are saying such things, which is sort of new. Let's find out what that's about. Now, I guess it's not new, in terms of like just the other day. This is a December 4th piece, an opinion piece in the Washington Post by Vladimir Kara-Murza. Let's scroll down and see if they describe his position to us. He's a Russian historian, filmmaker, and democracy activist, vice chairman of the Open Russia movement, and chairman of the Boris... Why do you have to move me? All right. The Boris Nemtsov Foundation for Freedom. Contributing writer at the Post, writing a weekly column for Democracy Post with a focus on Russia, which means you'll eventually be invited to a Russian consulate and dismembered, I think. And that's bad news for you. So, it has been said, he writes, that Russia is a country with an unpredictable past. Get it? An unpredictable past, as every new government tries to rewrite the historical narrative for its political advantage. In this, President Vladimir Putin's regime has been particularly active, launching a wholesale rehabilitation of the Soviet period early on. One of Putin's first acts in office was restoring the Stalin-era national anthem. Last month, Russian lawmakers took another big step in the same direction by approving a draft resolution that seeks to justify the Soviet Union's war in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. Oh my, I guess it's more widespread than we thought. The formal vote on the measure, proposed jointly by lawmakers from the United Russia and Communist parties, they were, I guess, always into it, will be held before the 30th anniversary of the withdrawal of Soviet troops on February 15th. Hailing the decision, communist lawmaker Nikolai Kharitonov probably, called it a victory for, quote, historical truth. Sure. The real historical truth, without quotation marks, was made public with the partial declassification of Soviet archives after 1991. The decision to invade Afghanistan was taken by the Politburo in December of 1979. The measure was euphemistically titled, On the Situation in A. The first contingent of the USSR's 40th Army crossed the Amu Darya River into Afghanistan on December 25th. What a nice day that must have been. 2 days later, the Afghan dictator Hafizullah Amin, wow, maybe, whose request for assistance served as the pretext for the invasion, was murdered by Soviet special forces in Tajbeg Palace. Don't ask for help from the USSR. My goodness. The war lasted for nearly a decade. Among its consequences, 1 million civilian casualties, the rise of Islamist fundamentalist groups backed by the West as a counterweight to the Soviets, and the collapse of the Soviet economy, which precipitated the end of the Soviet Union, which is now so lamented by both Putin and the communists, which is amazing because the collapse of the Soviet economy paved the way for Putin and the oligarchs to become extraordinarily rich, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they hated dictatorship. They just wanted to be rich and be dictators. The estimated cost in human lives for the Soviet armed forces was 15,000 dead and 54,000 injured. Military casualties in Afghanistan were long a forbidden topic in the Soviet Union. At a meeting in July of 1981, the Politburo expressly prohibited any commemorations for the Soviet war dead. Funerals for fallen servicemen were held in secret. Relatives were forbidden to mark the place of death on the gravestones. If they disobeyed, local officials removed the inscriptions. Russian journalist Yevgeny Kiselev, who himself served in Afghanistan as a language instructor, recalls that the war was taboo on Soviet television as late as 1988. As a child going to kindergarten in Moscow during the mid-1980s, I remember teachers whispering about the father of one of my classmates serving in Afghanistan. How weird. I'm adding the how weird part. I don't want to attribute that to him. State-imposed silence was broken by Russian dissidents, that unique community of people who were prepared to speak the truth even at an immense personal cost. Among them, Andrei Sakharov, the world-renowned nuclear physicist and Nobel Peace Prize winner, who condemned the invasion in the strongest terms. It was in large measure for that condemnation that he was confined to the closed city of Gorky between January of 1980 and December of 1986. I am proud of that exile in Gorky. It was an award for me, Sakharov said at the session of the Congress of People's Deputies, the Soviet Union's first semi-freely elected parliament in June of 1989. The war in Afghanistan was a criminal gamble. In December of that year, the Congress of People's Deputies passed a resolution of moral and political condemnation of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, signed by Mikhail Gorbachev in his capacity as chairman of the Supreme Soviet on December 24th. It is that statement that Russia's legislature, the Duma, is now preparing to declare null and void. The draft resolution holds that the 1989 condemnation went against, quote, historical justice, and that Soviet military action in Afghanistan was conducted in full accordance with the norms of international law. If the Kremlin is serious about nullifying the basic facts of 20th century history, it has great scope for legislative action. Other decisions it may want to revisit include the condemnation of Stalinism in the 1956 Communist Party Congress, the condemnation of the World War II-era Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact by the same Congress of People's Deputies in 1989, the recognition of the 1940 Soviet takeover of the Baltic states as an annexation made in the 1991 Russia-Lithuania Treaty signed by President Boris Yeltsin and ratified by the Russian Parliament, Yeltsin's condemnation of the 1968 Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, and many others. Such actions will not mean much, though, and not only because the legitimacy of those elected between 1989 and 1991 was infinitely higher than that of the current rubber-stamped Duma. In December 2000, liberal lawmaker Grigory Yavlinsky was preparing to speak at the Duma session that approved the Soviet national anthem. Like other opponents of the decision, he was prevented from taking the floor. Russian history will remember those who abolished the symbols of the totalitarian state, he planned to say, not those who temporarily restored them. Perhaps Yavlinsky was wrong after all. The latter will also be remembered by history, but with nothing more than derision and contempt, or at least one would hope that would be the case. But it's very interesting that this particular thing would make a comeback. And like I said, it's still a relatively small circle of people who think that that's a great idea. And very few of them are people that we would want planting such ideas in our moron president's head. And yet, this has happened. And it's worrisome. Absolutely. And, we'll have to keep an eye on it. With the weekend coming and everything, though, it's going to be pretty difficult to do. I know. That's true. And, that's your task nonetheless. Anyway, time for us to wrap up for the day and for the week. Don't despair, of course, of all the obstacles that stand in our way. This is the beginning of a new era in Congress. I guess I don't want to be too overly dramatic about it, but despite the fact that people are worried about using the I word and stuff like that, the investigations do look like they are going forward. There's very little choice for other things to do and very little other ways for members of Congress at this point in the House to occupy their time. And the official position is still that, well, we need to let the facts lead us where they may, and that's good news for the investigators. One of the main points, I think, perhaps of the Hill piece that Brad put together didn't come through, Brad Miller, that is, didn't come through quite as clearly in the Daily Beast piece, that time is short, that even starting these investigations right away runs the risk of running into time constraints and only finding yourself at the impasse that finally moves oversight chairs to decide, to make that critical decision about whether or not to go with inherent contempt or even to just sue in court. It may take them the full 2 years of the 116th Congress to get to that point if they slow walk it. So we're going to have to press them to move a lot faster than that so that they can decide once and for all how to resolve that issue well before they're looking to make their exits for campaign season.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Thanks for listening today, and hopefully we kept you from jumping up out of your seat when discussing the upstarts in the new Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others included among them. Do stay tuned for the rest of the Netroots Radio programming day, and fingers crossed and best wishes to justice. Hope we see you back next week.